Individual. I'll start again now that we're recording. Welcome to Information Privilege Beyond the Individual and Into the Collective, brought to you by the ACRL University Library Section's Professional Development Committee. We're so delighted to have you and our presenters here today. I am Colleen Quinn, co-chair of the committee. I will be moderating this program along with my fellow co-chair, Anna Sandelli, as well as our fellow committee member, Brad Zietz. This is one of an ongoing series of online programs sponsored by our committee. I'll go ahead and drop a link to our programs there in the chat. Before I introduce our presenters, a few logistics. This session is being recorded, and we will send the link of the video, slides, and any other supplemental documentation to everyone who registered for the program. Please note that we are not able to share the chat transcript due to privacy reasons, but we will be sure to share any links or questions we received in the chat along with the webinar recording. The program will run for an hour total, including time for questions. Please feel free to add questions into the chat box throughout the presentation at any time. Anna and Brad will be collating them and will be prepared to read them to today's presenters. As you use the chat feature, please make sure you send your message to all panelists and attendees, or it may be everyone, so everyone can see what you are asking. We will post a link to a brief evaluation in the chat box after the Q&A session, so please take a few moments to give us your feedback on today's program. With those announcements out of the way, I am very happy to start today's program, Information Privilege Beyond the Individual and Into the Collective. I'll briefly introduce our two presenters, and then they can more fully introduce themselves as they see fit. So first we have Jessica Dye. She is the Organizational Development and Learning Librarian at the University of Delaware Library, Museums and Press. We also have Charissa Powell, who is head of the Student Success and Curriculum Partnerships Department at the Library, Museums, and Press at the University of Delaware. And without further delay, I will hand it over to our panelists.
Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. And for those watching the recording, Jessica and I are really excited to talk to you about information privilege and thinking about some systemic changes. Jessica and I both work at the University of Delaware, which occupies land vital to the web of life for Lenape and Nanticoke, who share their ancestry, history, and future in this region. UD has financially benefited from this regional occupation, as well as from the indigenous territories that were expropriated throughout the United States land grant system. European colonizers and later the United States forced Nanticoke and Lenape westward and northward, where they formed nations in present-day Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ontario, Canada. Others never left their homelands or returned from exile when they could. We express our appreciation for ongoing Indigenous stewardship of the ecologies and traditions of this region. While the harms to Indigenous people and their homelands are beyond repair, we commit to building right relationships going forward by collaborating with tribal leadership on actionable institutional steps. And someone will be dropping the link. Awesome. Thank you so much, folks. All right. We want to start off by just saying a needs acknowledgement that everybody has needs, including your presenters. I'm going to be staying camera off today. Please let us know if you need us to slow down. And just a reminder for everyone to take care of themselves today and tomorrow. And if you need to leave this webinar, please feel free to do so and come back to it if and when you're able. In terms of our agenda, we just want to really say how thankful we are to folks in the room, as well as to ACRL and the ULS Professional Development Committee We know that so much labor goes into organizing a webinar like this, and Jessica and I are really grateful for the work that went into organizing for us to be here with you all today. We're going to spend about 30 minutes going over a brief lit review of information privilege, as well as how Jessica and I have worked with information privilege in the past. We'll then talk about potential future directions we'd love to see. At about 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, which is where Jessica and I are, we'll switch to a 15-minute discussion in Padlet, and we will be really respectful and switch to questions at about 2:45. Please feel free to use the chat, the Q&A features. We'll be taking questions throughout, but we'll also save time at the end. So if something is like sparking for you, feel free to throw it in the chat throughout, and we'll get to it as we're able. One of the goals that Jessica and I share for doing this webinar today is that we really wanted to use this discussion to inspire and expand applications around information privilege. So just by being here with you all today, it's incredibly meaningful to us, and we're really excited to see where our discussions take us today. To get a sense for who's in the room and just kind of, get to know who's here, how folks are thinking and feeling. If folks could please go to slido.com. The code is INFOPRIV, and a direct link is in the chat. We would just love to know folks' familiarity with information privilege thus far. If this is like when you signed up for this webinar, it's the first time you've heard of it, that's awesome. Or if you are super, super familiar and we're really anywhere in between, we're excited to be here with you. So Jessica is sharing the results. We've got, some folks, it's a little bit all over the place, honestly. So this is super helpful to us in just thinking about who's here today. We've got the majority of people are moderately familiar with this topic. So that's really just great for us to know and to be aware of. For those that are brand new to the topic, we are we're excited to have everyone here today, but we're really excited to be sharing a topic that we're both really passionate about and excited to learn more with you all. I see the responses slowing down, so we're going to switch to the next prompt, which is an open text field of just how would you define information privilege? This can be short, this can be long, this is going to be 1 word, 2 words, wherever you want to go with it. We're really excited to see what folks have to say. Some folks are using the chat, which is also completely welcome. So you're welcome to drop these responses in chat as well. So I see some responses about access to navigating search tools, thinking about the information lifecycle. Anna has dropped the chat to this Slido again. I'm seeing results about, institutional ability to access information and material, having the resources with information literacy skills, media literacy skills. Ooh, we've got hierarchy of needs, thinking about the time and brain space. Are any of these like jumping out to you, Jessica, that are good to chat about?
The speed in which they're just jumping is like kind of hard to read. So I'm just kind of like, just open-eyed, really.
No, this is going to be really exciting for us to dig back through after this webinar.
Definitely.
All right. I think what is really helpful is that each of these is a completely unique definition, which we're just really excited to see just the variety which with people interpret information privilege. Ooh, we have someone talking about information deployed as a form of or to maintain privilege, which we will definitely be getting into today. So that's probably a good jumping off point.
Yeah, so I'm gonna switch over back to the slides. Folks can keep looking at the responses. I think it's really helpful to see how other people define it, but we'll actually give you some definitions as well. So if you give me a second to switch back. Oh, that worked. Okay. So now what we're gonna do is provide a brief introduction to information privilege and then review some relevant frameworks, definitions, literature that have really influenced our thinking about information privilege and hopefully will propel us forward. I also have a tendency to talk too fast, so I would not be offended if you told me to slow down in the chat, just throwing that out there. But basically, here's one of the most often quoted definitions of information privilege. If anyone was giving a talk about information privilege, this definition would obviously be in there. So from Sharboot's 2014 blog post, they write that the concept of information privilege situates information literacy in a socio-cultural context of justice and access. Information as the media and message that underlie individual and collective awareness and knowledge building. Privilege as the advantages, opportunities, rights, and affordances granted by status and positionality via class, race, gender, culture, sexuality, occupation, institutional affiliation, and political perspective. You can tell from this definition that we're really talking about socio-cultural context. And we can definitely allude from here that like access to information is not neutral or equal, right? It's highly contingent on that status and positionality as described here. To also better understand and critique information privilege, it's important for us to really revisit the ACRL framework for information literacy and information literacy at large. I had a whole slide with the definition. I'm not going to do that. But like the ACRL framework defines information literacy as a set of integrated abilities encompassing the reflective discovery of information, the understanding of how information is produced and valued, and the use of information, creating new knowledge and participating ethically in communities of learning. We saw a lot of that actually in the Slido previously, right? It wasn't just, a lot of the definitions were about the access to information, but it was also the use of information, seeing yourself in knowledge and the development of knowledge and new knowledge as well. And so with the information literacy framework, we really saw that move from standards and like measuring skills and competencies to this framework in which we have knowledge, practices, and dispositions. Information privilege is actually integrated into the disposition section of information as value. It says that learners who are developing the information literate abilities are inclined to examine their information privilege. It's a one-liner, but I think it's really helpful for us to think about value. And that's really where the application of information has really jumped off, right? Especially in the information literacy classroom, teaching students how information is valued and how you access it, thinking about paywalls, thinking about what happens to your access to databases the day that you graduate. That's a lot of the application that we've seen. But we also want to remind ourselves of that other piece, right? It's not just about the access. And so let me move on to the next slide. I really like this quote from Gregory and Higgins from 2013. And they say, this is really a definition of critical information literacy. And they say it takes into consideration the social, political, economic, and corporate systems that power and influence over information production, dissemination, access, and consumption. So for me, this is really a reminder that we're not just talking about access, right? We're thinking about what knowledge exists out there, who has access to creating knowledge, using it, interpreting it, etc. And then now we're going to go into a brief lit review. And this is the one where I have to really watch myself because I could probably talk on and on because there are a lot of things we've cited here. So as anyone who's really talking about information literacy often really points to information poverty. So Elfrida Chapman was an LIS educator who really studied social groups with marginalized identities, working with prisoners, working moms. So in this article from 1996, I don't know what year it is, she wrote about information poverty and really gave us a lens of insiders and outsiders. It's really from a very social science background, very similar to intergroup theory. So those who are inside, those who are outside. If you're an insider, you often have access to information based on your social identity. If you're an outsider, you don't have as ready access to that information. So that's 1996. Booth in 2013 wrote in a blog post about linking open access and information literacy, and then gave us the 2014 blog post about information privilege that often gets cited. Hare and Evanson in 2018 wrote about outreach to undergraduate students. And we actually want to do a shout out to Sarah because originally the three of us were going to do work on information privilege, but life happened. So we're really thankful to Sarah for bringing us together. And then Chris and I are here today providing you this webinar for this fruitful discussion, we hope. But Sarah and her colleague wrote about how they use information privilege to really outreach to students, right? And so they had a panel and I think they had a booth and they talked to graduates or undergraduate students about what would happen the day that they graduated. They really talked about, they really tied information privilege to ethics, a reflection of their responsibility, and like used a lot of student reflection to really have the students reflect on what they would do once they graduated. And obviously, Charissa wrote a piece in 2020 in the Library with the Lead Pipe. So she wrote about her experience. It's a case study and best practices based on her experience teaching a first-year seminar using information privilege as a framework. I'm not going to go into that because Charissa will tell you about that experience. And then in 2020, Ellen Wood wrote about information capitalism. And that's really framed within Feister's third wave of information literacy, right? So it's not just accessing information on the internet, right? It's really about the commodification of information. And so basically, I have to go back to my notes because I'm getting way off track here. But thinking about information capitalism as an extension of information privilege, and they posit that in information capitalism, IL curriculum would address the commodification of information labor, and surveillance and privacy. And they really emphasize more of a collective approach and really reminds us of Booth's original thought about collective approaches. And then in 2022, Bergstrom, Lynch, Mahoney, and Thomas used information privilege to examine open pedagogy. So they were thinking about students as OER creators, and they have a definition that's a little bit more intersectional and really framing knowledge as within the academy. That gives us kind of a lens to kind of critique what is information, what is knowledge, and who shapes that information. And then Sua in 2023 gave a presentation and really identified 3 domains of information privilege. I think Amber might be in this room, but they gave us 3 domains, and that's awareness of information resources, experience with information resources, and the whole research process itself, and then access to information resources, which can be interpreted in 2 different ways. The actual like obtaining of the article, book chapter, book in question, but also how you meaningfully engage with that information. Not too bad. I'm looking at time. Okay, we're good. So now what we're going to do is really switch gears from that like sort of broad overview and talk about how Chris and I have both used information privilege. Like Colleen introduced us before, I'm the Organizational Development and Learning Librarian at the University of Delaware. You're probably wondering what I'm doing here. It is true that nowadays my scope is really employee facing, but I do have a reference and instruction, open education background. And so when I was in more of a student facing role, I often used information privilege to kind of frame what we were talking about. So when I was a resident librarian and open education librarian at West Virginia University, I used information privilege to as a framework for an existing course, ULab 101, and then I also used it for a graduate student workshop. So in the ULab 101, I was actually inspired by Charissa, And this is before she published her article. We were both like Twitter mutuals. I don't know, do you say ex mutuals now? I'm not on Twitter anymore. I don't even know anything. But I saw her posting about information privilege, right? And I actually asked her for a copy of her syllabus. I found it the other day in my files because I was looking for something else. And it was just kind of an amazing moment where she was like, oh my gosh, you were inspired by me. And it was a wonderful moment. So always acknowledge the people who have influenced you. So thank you, Charissa. So I was inspired by Charissa, and then Buck and Valentino's article. Yeah, it was an article. They talked about how they used OER and social justice as a framework for an honors course that they were teaching. So I was like, hey, I could do that too. And so basically I was teaching a hybrid 1-credit library research course. It had an existing curriculum. So I wasn't really changing the curriculum itself, but I was using the in-person sessions to really facilitate conversations and discussions about information privilege. I remember the first class we had, we talked about like, how much did your textbook cost, et cetera, et cetera. You can kind of see the natural flow of that. But the funny sort of very meta thing is I don't have a copy of the syllabus anymore because when I left WVU, I forgot to keep a copy of everything. So it's a very meta example of like loss of access to information when you lose your institutional affiliation. It's just, I was just rolling my eyes at myself. But I'll keep moving forward. And then in the other example, I taught the same graduate workshop to different sort of graduate students. But basically we had this graduate immersion program. So folks who signed up, it was a bunch of workshops, so very skill-based, and mine was very theory-based, very discussion-based. It was often the last one. So folks were pretty like, it was a kind of a switch. It was really fun for me. And so basically we covered the conceptual framework of information literacy. And then we played that UVA, what costs more game. I think someone's going to put a link to that. Yes, thank you, Anna. And so we kind of like, through playing that game, we kind of interrogated how much library resources cost. This was often a revelatory moment for students in the room, right? They were maybe undergrads like yesterday, maybe 10 years ago, but a lot of times we don't talk about the cost of these materials. So that was really a good springboard for conversation. And then we actually launched into discussion. And so I'll put a sample of some of the questions. What are social, political, corporate barriers to producing, accessing, or sharing information? So you can see I tied that directly from that Gregory and Higgins quote from before. What are some research practices that center, cite, engage, and marginalized voices in your field? Because they're really coming in from their field of study. What is one thing you might do differently now, knowing what you know about information privilege? Because oftentimes it was their first time encountering that concept. And I also did a session of this for a women and genders study course that my colleague invited me to. I think Lynn's in here, so shout out to Lynn Stahl. So if you ever have the opportunity to work with Lynn, she's amazing. So I did a version of that too, but that was a rough one because it was definitely like height of the pandemic. We were on Zoom. It was rough, but we tried. We tried. And I think now I will stop talking and then hand it over to Charissa so she can share what she's done with information privilege.
Thank you. I think I'm loving the amount of people who are in the room that we're giving shout outs to. So thanks y'all for being here. This is really cute. So I also have a teaching and learning background, and I'm in a management position right now for the first time. So similarly to Jessica, I'm kind of thinking through like, what does information privilege work look like in a different type of position? The two examples of my work I wanted to share today was that I'll very surface level overview of, and then we'll get into some future directions. Is just my work with the LibParlor online learning IMLS grant, and then I'll do a little overview of my first year seminar that I taught at the University of Tennessee. So right now I'm on a grant project team for LibParlor online learning, and as I was preparing for this webinar, it kind of reminded me of all the ways that in the very early stages of putting together a grant proposal, we were talking about information privilege. And so I pulled out, this is language from one of our grant goals that we had put together, probably back in like 2019. And just that we wanted to, our grant project is to create a curriculum that teaches folks how to research and write and publish academic articles. And one of the reasons we've really wanted to do that was to really democratize this privileged knowledge of learning how to do research. And I could definitely do like a whole presentation on the ways that that is really problematic. But we are launching our curriculum next, oh my gosh, later in June this year. So if you go to the next slide, please. This is kind of a preview of the 6 courses in the curriculum that we'll be releasing. This will be completely freely available. And that was something that we felt so strongly about, was that how, thinking about financial, how expensive a lot of training programs are. And so if you are so interested, this will be released. We have some of the most brilliant people in our field, I believe, who created these courses and the curriculum for us. So I'm just really excited for that to be out there. And that's an example to me of some of the changes you can make with democratizing knowledge and information. The course I taught at UT Knoxville really grounded a lot of the work and how I think about information privilege today. So I taught a 1-credit course for 3 years. I had 16 weeks with students, and it was such, honestly, a privilege to myself to be able to dive into some of these bigger topics with students that is more challenging in a one-shot session. So if we skip forward 2 slides. Some of the conversations I had with students, also everyone has access to the slides, so if you want to go back to any of this, it's there. But some of the conversations we had were just, like we started out talking about internet access and, very stereotypical thinking about how do you access information. But we also got into some conversations about like student loan debt and racial identities and like the disparity between financial literacy and student loan debt. So that was a topic we got into. And next slide, please. Oh, just kidding. Yes. Perfect. Thank you. And we also got into, thinking about representation of voices in materials. And the example we used was queer representation in archival materials. So if that is at all of interest to you, we're going to be sharing all of our works cited where folks can dig in more to any of this. The research study I did with my students at the end of the semester was really that there were so many different definitions of information privilege. And I, as a teacher, I think so deeply about students as creating knowledge. And so I asked my students to define information privilege in their own words. And one of the quotes I wanted to share with you today is just the student at the end of the semester. Their definition was that information privilege is the ability for people to access information based on their economic status, power, race, and more. And that'll really push us into thinking about some potential future directions we would love the field to take. I am going to do a pause and check in if there's any questions thus far. All right, we are going to continue. We're going to talk about some potential future directions, and then we'll kick it off to a Slido for discussion and then wrap up with Q&A. So thinking back to Booth's definition of information privilege, which was somehow now 10 years ago. So this is also, it feels like a really big deal to be thinking about a term 10 years into the field, and is like Jessica and I really want to take this moment for us to think 10 years in the future, and even more than that? What do we want this work to continue to look like? And something we would love to see is really digging into this piece that Booth writes about in terms of this could be a way that informs the way we collaborate, design, manage, lead, and advocate. So really moving beyond access to information individually and thinking about more collective systemic changes we could be making. Some of the critiques we have are really that the term itself, just by the name itself, focuses on privilege. It is in the title. It focuses those with privilege in the terminology. And so, you know, what would it look like if we were rooting information privilege in critical race theory? Like, those are some questions we're wanting to be asking today. This term also really makes some assumptions about the value of scholarly knowledge, because even some of the examples that were listed today, which Jessica and I also give, is that the example of a paywall is such an easy example to give, but not everyone's artwork or their articles are in a paywall situation. Like, a lot of things are open and freely available. We would also love to see work that is more explicit about intersectionality of identities with information privilege moving forward. Jessica, do you want to answer the question in the chat now or later?
We can answer it now. So yeah, definitely we can pause for chat questions. So the question is, have you noticed any differences pre or post-pandemic in terms of information privilege and student access to information? I think where I noticed it most was like my last institution, people were talking about, it was more of like a digital divide conversation, right? Would students have access to the course if everyone was at home? Would they be posted up in a McDonald's parking lot? So I think that brought a lot of attention to inequities in our like internet access, but I don't know that I saw more information privilege kind of conversations. I don't know if you saw anything, Charissa.
The thing that comes to mind for me that this question brings up, which is less pre and post pandemic and more, I have seen such a resurgence in this conversation around generative AI tools and who can afford to purchase premium versions of tools. So that's actually what's coming to mind with Samantha's question most at the front of my brain right now. Thank you, Samantha. Folks on this call are also welcome to answer this question. Yes, Jessica said it best. Feel free to discuss in the chat. We're here to learn from all of these beautiful brains here today. Jessica is moving me along. Thank you so much. In thinking about intersectionality, thinking about race, what would information privilege look like if it were more centered in a critical race theory? Thinking about counter storytelling, we have Chandra Walker's example in 2015 talking about her experience being a librarian of color in our field of library science. We've also got white supremacy culture and thinking about the ways that higher education and library science as a field really upholds white supremacy culture, especially as a library profession that is majority white and white women. We've also got Rapcheck's 2019 article, thinking about the ACRL framework again. The word race and racism do not appear in the entire document, even though information privilege is mentioned, the words race and racism do not. So there's clearly a really long way for us to go with race and information privilege. So thinking even further about intersectionality, if we're adding gender to the mix, you know, thinking about that library science is a majority white women, and really thinking about Thorngate's article in 2021 that posits the ways that information literacy even reinforces information privilege. And so these are a few things that we would just love the field to be thinking about, discussing, and really rooting further into with future work on information privilege. So again, thinking about scholarly publishing as an example, I was trying to like find some hard facts for this because I thought that would be fun for whatever reason. And it's not. Less than 25% of editors are Black, Indigenous, and people of color at 25 leading medical and scientific journals. So really thinking through like the biases that folks have, that white people have who are on those editorial boards, and the way that that impacts the creation of information, the information that's getting published, and who is being published in these journals. We've got some community-driven strategies that are working to kind of go against that. So we've got Uproot's BIPOC citation, so only citing Black, Indigenous, and people of color in their work. And we've got hashtag Cite Black Women Collective. So folks in our field are really trying to work against this. And we're really wanting to use this moment to think about as a field, how do we move forward with this work? So we already talked about some potential future directions. We talked about generative AI a little bit. Some other things we'd love to see explored is cultural capital in development and access of information. We'd love to see information privilege used to analyze epistemic justice, and even more interrogation of information practices in general about creating, publishing, a lot of those more information life cycle sides of the topic. Oh, and thank you. Yes, thank you so much.
Oh, that's a cue for me to start talking, I think. So what we're going to do now is actually move to the discussion portion. We're a little, I think, over time, but not too much. But what we're going to do is have this time to sort of generate ways in which we could expand information privilege, right? We kind of primed the pump, gave you some of the things we were thinking about. Hopefully that sparked some interest, and there's a lot of discussion in the chat. I can't fully follow along, but I know there's a lot going on in there. But let's see. We were thinking maybe the future of information privilege, does it stay the same, even though like we have some critiques of the use of centering those with privilege? Is it information capitalism, thinking about that commodification of information, maybe information justice? What would a justice framework look like? Like something with a race perspective, that critical race theory, what are the potential futures? And so what we're going to do now is really invite you to a Padlet. So if I think we're going to, yes, thank you. Anna put a link to the Padlet. We have 3 questions for you, and they are: what other scholarship around information privilege exists? So that really brief lit review that we gave you and the citations we gave you don't encompass everything, right? Maybe folks in this room have actually written, published, presented about information privilege. What should we also be looking at? What changes would you like to see information privilege make in a more collective way, right? In Booth's original blog post, there's a lot of talk about systemic change, is really rooted in critical pedagogy, talking about a collective effort, but it's really hard to realize that. Like I struggle to realize that in application process, in applying that in my teaching, right? And so how could we actually do that in a more collective way? And then what critiques do you see or do you have about information privilege? So please engage in there, and then we will sort of just be quiet for a little bit and then check in and then have questions. We actually have some slides, but we will give you a moment to engage with the Padlet, build on each other's thoughts. Anything you want to add in here, Charissa?
Just that if folks want to engage over chat, that is totally okay too. Thank you so much.
I love the shameless plug in there. I was trying to figure out a way to like heart it. So like self-cite yourself. Tell us what you're working on.
I just enabled the heart reaction on posts so folks can heart things if they want on the Padlet.
No apologies necessary in the Padlet. You can often share things that we've already shared. We're only here for an hour today, so we don't get everything. We don't catch everything.
I loved this comment about incorporating citation justice principles when teaching about citations, and incorporating that into talking about why citing matters with students, which is such a better framing than like from a I don't know, cheating like perspective. And so thank you.
Natalie Hill and Laura Tedena have a presentation from the last ACRL about citation and really moving from that deficit framework. So that's an excellent presentation. You can go back and watch. I know our access to like the last ACRL presentation is going to end soon, but I think that one's on their YouTube channel. I'm trying to find the link to it. If anyone else has the link, you can share it too, because I can't find it. But we're going to switch over pretty soon because we do want to leave time for Q&A, because a lot of times if we actually went through all of the content we wanted to share with you, we would not have Q&A. So we're going to do a hard stop in about like a minute or so. Okay, so we wanted just to take this moment to sort of remind you of our goals, right? Use this time, this discussion to inspire the expansion and application of information privilege. So with the slider that we had earlier with the different definitions, maybe that sparks something for someone who's new to this idea, or even in the Padlet, maybe you see a lot of connections. There was some talk about like neurodiversity. There's a lot of talk about citation in the Padlet and in the chat. I think that this can be a springboard for thinking about what you might want to do in the classroom or even write about, right? And so it's just a reminder for you to think about that if you're interested. We have a lot of references, so we put them in a Google Doc instead of on the slides because they were looking really messy. So I think one of the committee members will put the link in the chat, but it's here on this slide as well. But we are actually going to get to questions. Okay, so I think we answered the question about information privilege and student access to information during the pandemic. Let's see another question. I'm curious to the implications in current and future hiring processes for individuals of diverse backgrounds seeking employment in institutions and jobs where their employer may be either resistant to or ignorant of this scope. That is an amazing piece. I've seen a lot more presentations about hiring practices, more inclusive hiring practices. I went to a really good webinar about neuro inclusion recently. I think there are definitely conversations happening. I don't know that they're happening equally or across the board, right? I'm not sure if, Charissa, you want to weigh in on that?
Tell me which question it is in the Google Doc, sorry.
No, I just highlighted it.
Thank you so much, you're a gem. I don't think I have an answer.
If anyone wants to comment on that, I'm going to put it in the chat if folks want to engage with it in the chat as well. There are a lot of good citations in there. Tarita, who's in here, teaches a class with Twana Ann or Nukath about like hiring practices for library juice academy. Yeah, there are a lot of people doing this kind of work, right? So definitely please engage in the chat. Another question we had, I don't know, is there a question you want to address, Charissa?
I am feeling such a lovely sense of overwhelm looking at this Google Doc, so let me find one real quick.
While you're doing that, I'll just chime in. We had a question about whether the transcript will be saved, and the transcript can't be saved by attendees, but we are collecting all of the wonderful links that you're sharing in chat, sharing them with the presenters, and working on ways to get those out to registrants. So keep sending great links.
So there is, I think, a question about, I've been interested in the efforts to engage people who are not white cisgender males in becoming information contributors in Wikipedia to broaden Wikipedia's representation and educate this open space for surfacing information by and about minoritized groups. Thought about this approach? Has anyone tried that? There's an excellent art and feminism approach, right? This is a very community-driven approach to highlight often women who are doing women in particular topics. So that's one piece. Have other people engaged with Wikipedia?
I think I saw this in chat already, but did someone talk about, oh, we got someone raising a hand, or in the chat. Oh, yes, I was thinking about the Art Plus Feminism Wikipedia edit-a-thon, which was already listed. So thank you to folks. I think thank you to Abby.
Harry makes a comment about it's important to be candid about the barriers that underrepresented folks face as Wikipedia editors, i.e. toxicity, removal of content that cites publications that are written by or for people of color. So, or just bumping. Okay, bumping Carrie's comment. Okay, awesome. So yeah, even though I think a lot of our solutions are, oh, you could just do that. It's not really a clear answer, right? There are a lot of barriers still within even Wikipedia. I actually don't see any other questions. I think most of the things are
Yeah,
resources that people have shared. Is there a question that we've missed?
we
Oh.
just got one in the chat. They said, can you expand more on talking about citations in relation to information privilege, especially when approaching this topic with undergraduate students or folks new to research? I think we've got some examples already that folks have shared, but I think it's a great way to talk about citations as a, thinking about citations as a conversation between scholars. And, thinking about to the ACRL framework, even though we said lots of the ways that it's incredibly problematic. But scholarship is conversation, I think, is a frame to think about that for this question. Just in terms of who is getting cited, whose voices are getting cited, as really thinking about who is being included in a conversation. And I think, so this person was specifically asking about undergraduate students, but I think that's just as important to share with new graduate students sometimes, and honestly, same with faculty, depending on like what your context is for where you're working.
And so in that graduate workshop that I used to teach, it was really nice talking to graduate students, right? Because they're in this new frame where they are oftentimes expected to publish or conduct research. And so giving them a little bit sense of like, what are some alternative ways to engage in their scholarship practices, but also recognizing some of the constraints, right? Like you can't just publish wherever you want. There are real ramifications for like where you publish, how you publish, some of the practices. So it's really complex, but having that discussion with folks can kind of reveal what's under the hood, so to speak. I don't know metaphors and I should stop using them. Idioms, not metaphors. I'm terrible with idioms and I should not say that while we're being recorded.
That's okay. I think you and I can both go on the record with being, full humans. Someone said in the chat that they talk about citation gaps and real world implications of that, such as tenure and promotion, and that both undergrads and grad students resonate with that a lot. Thank you.
Are there any questions that we missed? I know we're not like fully answering all of the questions. It's also like brain capacity. There's just a lot of like words floating around. So it's kind of hard to address it fully. But are there any questions that we've missed or glossed over too much?
You all have done a great job with a very active chat and Google Doc. There was one that came in early on that I'll go back to for a second, asking if unapproved download sites have changed the landscape. That was the one that I saw that I don't think we talked about as much.
I think, I don't know, like I personally don't have the information, know like how much like those sites have like really changed landscape. I think they're a useful teaching tool, right? Like there's that piece of the ACRL framework that talks about ethical participation in creating knowledge, right? So like using that as an example or a case study of like, there are real implications of these paywalls. How do we make decisions as graduate students, as undergraduates, as faculty who need access to research but don't have it? And then you see something that is on like an illegal site or whatever, and how do we actually kind of deal with that? So I've in the past, I don't know that I've actually used it as a teaching tool, but I think there's a lot of utility in using that and framing that conversation. Charissa, did you have anything to add, or anyone in the chat have thoughts about that?
I was actually, that question made me think about something slightly outside of academia, which is downloading illegal PDFs of like fun books to read. And that's a conversation, you know, I see on TikTok a lot, just in terms of like, you know, making sure, especially authors are getting paid for their work. So that actually goes to one of the responses I saw in the Padlet, just in terms of like making things freely available, and sometimes that tension with being paid for your labor is a very real tension. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Are we maybe gonna just address the next question? I think.
Yeah, let's do that.
So I see another one. I'm curious to hear folks' thought about respectfully and properly introducing or managing information / resources for groups that you do not identify as a member of, such as managing LGBTQ+ resources if you do not identify as such. How do you ensure you are properly and thoroughly and respectfully representing that information? That's an excellent question. I think that one of the best ways to think about this is nothing about us without us, right? From the disability justice community. And so really reflecting as information professionals, what are we doing that could really propel or introduce bias without talking to members of that community. So there's often like you should take the lead of folks from that community rather than making those decisions and taking a paternalistic approach to that. So I think that is a very simple answer, but I think that's a really useful one. I don't know if other people have thoughts in the chat. And we do have 3 minutes left, so we won't be talking forever.
I was just gonna share, and if folks need to head out, thank you so much for being here. I shared a link in the chat to the Nothing About Us Without Us book.
I think I like bungled the saying.
No,
So
I don't
thank you
think
for
you
like
did.
saying it correctly.
No. Someone asked about experience talking about this with younger students, and I don't know what age group they mean by younger. I work a lot with first-year students, and the class I taught was with very traditional first-time first-year students, and I think they're just incredibly receptive to this. If anything, more angry about this, and like have a lot of energy to bring to these conversations.
I think we've had a really active chat, definitely, especially as we were wrapping up towards the end with all these wonderful questions. I just want to say again, thank you all so much. And thank you again to all of our panelists for sharing your expertise with us today. I would also like to thank Aaliyah Price, Alois Sharp, as well as everyone in the ACRL office who always help make the magic happen for these presentations. Remember that we will send this link to the recording and other supplemental documents for this session when it is available. We also have been dropping a link to the evaluation link. I will drop it one more time again here in the chat. Please, if you have time, just to go ahead and answer a couple of questions so we can continue improving these wonderful presentations. So thank you all for coming, and I think we'll go ahead and close it out. Thank you so much, Jessica and Charissa. This was really wonderful.